What happens when one man tries to watch all the sci-fi pictures of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. We're getting close to the ending of 1982 here, and this has been a really strong year for sci-fi. And the first half of 82 was stacked. But, as we're about to see, the latter half isn't as epic, even though it has quite a few pretty known films, although maybe not known for the same reasons. We're starting out in the middle of August, the end of summer season, and on the 20th, we went back to school with the class of 1984. It starts by telling us about violence in American high schools and says the worst is yet to come. And like, hey movie, maybe don't be so accurate, huh? We're at Lincoln High in the near future of 1984, and after an opening theme song from Alice Cooper, we meet new teacher Mr. Norris and his first day in a city school. And one of his peers is Peter Vincent. He very quickly realizes that things are very different here, and he teaches music. In his class is someone who should be eating hot dogs at Camp Mohawk, Deneen, who we saw earlier this year on the Horror Project in Incubus, a very young Michael P. Keaton, and this guy, Timothy Van Patten. And he's acted in quite a few things, but in the 90s he switched to directing and is now one of the most sought after in the industry. He's done 20 episodes of The Sopranos, 18 episodes of Boardwalk Empire, episodes of Game of Thrones, Deadwood, The Wire, Black Mirror, Sex and the City, basically name a high-profile TV show, and he's done some episodes. So Peter is the leader of a very unruly gang, and there's rivals around that lead to some big brawls. They actually show up at Andrew's house to pick on him and his wife, and sure enough, the new teacher and the volatile Peter start butting heads, leading to the inevitable escalation and eventual violence. And even though this is about American schools and stuff, it's actually a Canadian production and was entirely shot in Toronto. The director was Mark Lester, and this is his first appearance on the project, but we'll see him again since he's the guy who made Firestarter, but he also made Commando. Recently, he slipped pretty hard into the B-movie world, making things like Poseidon Rex, but this was the film that essentially kickstarted his career. One of the writers was none other than Tom Holland, one of his very first gigs, and he worked with Lester to develop the full script. Once they had a draft going, they brought in Barry Schneider, a friend of Lester's, and the guy who had just written Take This Job and Shove It, and also wrote Harper Valley PTA. He was responsible for coming up with the unique slang of the punks and giving them their own sort of language. However, after a screening of the film, Schneider was so upset at the level of violence in the movie that he asked to have his name taken off of it. That violence got it into more trouble when it was banned in multiple countries. The UK made them cut out over 4 minutes of footage, and finally just straight up refused its release. It ended up not doing well theatrically, but it earned a pretty solid cult following on cable and video rentals, enough to earn it multiple sequels. The first of which was also directed by Lester, although they're completely unconnected to the events here. It's now regarded as being eerily prophetic and showing schools where teachers are forced to carry guns and students have to walk through metal detectors, and the movie treats it like, look how insane this would be, right? And I think this is a pretty good one. I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. There's a lot to like here. It never really clicks into gear. It takes a little bit too long to get to where it's going, but it's a pretty solid film all around. Its sci-fi significance is a 3, since it didn't really change the genre too much and didn't make that much of an impact, but it is still pretty well known and has quite a few stars involved. Should you watch it? Yes, enroll in this class today. This next one technically didn't hit theaters until January of 1983, but it had a premiere screening a little before that on August 27th in Texas, and it's Time Riter, The Adventures of Lyle Swan. And this movie is just bonkers and begins with famous dirt bike rider Lyle Swan, and it's none other than Earl Bassett himself. He's in the middle of a big cross-country race when his new high-tech enhancements to his bike go off kilter, and he ends up way off course, smack dab in the path of a top-secret scientific time travel experiment that shoots him into the past, the year 1877. While there, the first thing he does, literally the first thing, is accidentally scare an old man to death, so he buries him, and then shrugs. There's a gang of outlaws here with Keys at the forefront, and he's with Clark, who, not watching the dogs here, and also Bob the Goon. Although, if I wanted to stick to the Western theme, I guess I could have just called him Frog. Swan is spotted by the outlaws, as well as Claire, who lives in a nearby town with the guy who owns Cujo. The outlaws become obsessed with getting Swan's motorcycle, which leads him to the town, and while there, he and Claire end up in bed together. And look for a fairly early role for Chris Mulkey as he tries to keep the bike out of the hands of Reese's gang and maybe get back home. Although Swan hilariously just never puts two and two together, and for the most of the runtime of the film, he just thinks that he's in Mexico instead of over 100 years in the past. And okay, where to start with this one? It was directed by William Deere, who mostly handled family films like Angel in the Outfield, but also made Harry and the Hendersons, and If Looks Could Kill with Richard Grieco. Deere also co-wrote it, but the other writer is probably more notable, since he was also the producer of the film. And oh yeah, also Mike Nesmith of The Monkees. It's really the only non-Monkees feature that he would write for, and he would also handle the score here. And look, there's no way to talk about this film without talking about that ending, because it's a very strong case of what the hell were they thinking here? Although I really don't want to spoil it, so I'm gonna talk around some things. But suffice it to say that it's absolutely insane. And it also creates an impossible object, much like the film Somewhere in Time. There's an object from the future brought back to the past that ends up being the same object given to that character in the future. Therefore, it came from nowhere. It appeared with the character in the past, traveled through time where it ended up back with that character, and then disappears into the past again, never having been created, and only existing because of the time travel. And hey, speaking of time travel, in other movies, Swan lands on what they say is November 5th, 1877. And a few years earlier, in the movie Time After Time, H.G. Wells would travel forward in time to November 5th, 1979. And then, of course, a few years later, Marty McFly would travel to November 5th, 1955. So I don't know what's up with November 5th and time travel. And Swan's doing things that Marty specifically tried not to. But this one didn't really do that well at the theaters, only pulling in around $3.5 million, and was definitely a cable staple. And that's where I watched it around 100 times, but nostalgia only goes so far. So I give this one a 3. It's pretty fun and entertaining, but just takes forever to get anywhere. Its SFCS is a 2.5 though, since it's a little remembered, but not really all that much, although it has some names attached to give it some extra cred. Should you watch it? Yes, for the ending alone, so you can just scratch your head at how outlandish it is. We're headed into September now, and on the 3rd, there was the release of Zapped. If this high school looks familiar, that's because it will very shortly be where Nancy Thompson goes to school, and Chachi is here doing an experiment on a mouse. Bible Man is here too, and you might be wondering if this is the Charles in Charge movie, but this was actually a few years before that aired. The Fall Girl is here, and if you're keeping score at home, Thomas, not Locklear. And this was in the era when you'd have a guy that was just like a total sex pest and he was the comic relief. And Buddy's Peyton is essentially the ultimate one of those. Dick Halloran is here too, and follow me here. Barney has this super grow plant food, and Coach accidentally mixes it with cannabis extract. But then Peyton adds beer to it, and when you mix those things together and smash them on the ground, you, I guess, get telekinesis out of it. Oh, and Barney lives in a neighborhood full of little kids on bikes with the voice of 40-year-old men.
Barney Boneheads.
Up yours.
But yeah, he soon starts realizing that he can do things with his mind, like drop maps. And hey, is that Corinne Bohrer? But of course, Barney can also make girls' tops pop open and sweep up messes. Pretty soon, nerdy Bernadette, and you know she's nerdy because she wears glasses, finds out about his powers. And so does Peyton. And he wants Barney to help him get money and get laid. But Bernadette wants to figure out how it all works for science, and much silliness ensues. And this is from Robert Rosenthal, who only directed two things, a comedy from '78 called Malibu Beach, and this. And originally, this was meant to be a much tamer film with a PG rating. But then Porky's happened, and teen sex comedies were all the rage, so they went back in and reshot several scenes in order to add more nudity. They added in the entire sequence that takes place after the baseball game, which included a very young Jewel Shepard. They also reshot Barney and Bernadette's love scene to steam it up. And speaking of the nudity, that caused quite a bit of controversy. It seems that Heather Thomas very staunchly was against doing a nude scene, and they provided a body double, which is pretty standard stuff. But when they feature a photograph of her character naked, they superimposed her head onto a nude model. Unlike the body double scene, which is pretty clearly not her, the photo looks like she took her top off, and she was unaware that they were going to do this. She complained, and as such, they added a credit that stated that the nude sequences were not actually her. Even though critics straight up hated it and called it abominable and juvenile, it did well enough, earning around $17 million. After that, it was a major hit on home video, cable runs, where it played practically every other day. There would be a belated straight-to-video sequel in 1990 with Zapped again, although only Sue Ann Langdon would return from the original cast. And I can't say I don't have nostalgia for this, so I give it a 3, but yeah, it's not a good movie and it didn't really age well. I think we're supposed to be on Peyton's side through a portion of this movie, but I just kept waiting for everyone to kick his ass. Its significance is also a 3, since I feel like this has been a pretty strongly seen film, but it's really only notorious for a specific point in time. Should you watch it? Yeah, it's entertaining enough and kind of funny to watch and try to pinpoint what they did in the reshoots.
That's my wife. Found out why I hid the salami in the garage.
You supposed to be making chopsticks.
Mr. Einstein.
They will teach you.
I feel like those movies have been definitely more known, but now let's check out one with an unknown date, and it's from sometime in '82, and it's The Aftermath. It begins with a trio of astronauts on their way back to Earth, but down there, strange things are afoot as these guys are corralling people like cattle. Their leader is Captain Spaulding, and they kill all the men and take the women, and the space guys crash land, killing one of them. And they soon discover that something happened while they were away that killed massive amounts of people on the same beach as the one from the Planet of the Apes, which is ironic considering how similar the concepts are. They encounter mutants and discover that the city is destroyed, most likely due to a massive nuclear war. After taking shelter, they soon discover that the danger isn't over, as there's radiation storms, and they soon discover some survivors in a nearby museum, and one of them is Forrest J. Ackerman himself. And if you don't know who Forry is, well, this guy was considered one of the biggest and best horror and sci-fi fans of all time. He created famous Monsters of Filmland back in 1958 and was regarded as the foremost expert on the genre scene. He puts Newman in charge of a young boy as he's dying, and they also find a woman on the run from Cutter and his crew, and then have to survive everything that this new world is throwing at them. And that guy playing Newman is a man named Steve Barkett, and he was a struggling actor at the time, and wanted to come up with a film of his own, and developed this script, and after a while, found a producer willing to invest, and also allow Barkett to direct it himself. But then that fell through when there were creative differences, and the producer wanted to call the movie Invasion of the Mutant People. Instead, Barkett raised up around $150K to make it on his own, and cast himself as the lead, who of course saves the day, and that the female lead is instantly attracted to. This was all back in 1978, and after shooting a chunk of the film, he decided that he was unhappy with it, and went back to reshoot practically everything, with all new actors. It's unknown if it got any theatrical play, but it was definitely released on VHS. And in the UK, it was titled Zombie Aftermath, but would end up getting seized and confiscated there as part of the Video Nasty Panic, although it would not be prosecuted. There was a sort of remake, in a way, with a film from 1987 called Survivor, although it's not known if it was meant to be one, or if it's just such a similar concept that people tagged it as one. And I'm gonna give this a 2.5. It's alright, but it's perhaps a little too held back by its own budget to do the things that it seems to want to do. I will say that I was fairly surprised at how generally mean-spirited it was in terms of killing off its characters. Its significance is a 1.5 though, since it's pretty unheard of all around, and the extra 0.5 is just for the video nasty stuff. Should you watch it? Maybe. I mean, it's alright. Here's another one with an unknown release date, but again, we know it came out sometime in '82, and it's Mysterious Planet. We start off in space with an alien ship, and there's a space storm that creates a wormhole, and it falls through, becoming lost in space. They crash land on a very Jupiter-looking planet, and for some reason all have a thick New Yak accents, and what's really weird is that I'm not sure who's talking. I think it's supposed to be this guy, but his mouth isn't moving.
There's nothing in that direction but sand and water for miles.
Where's Marcus?
He's back there, having a tent.
They're mostly humanoid, but there's one alien-looking guy with them, and then something amazing happens. They're attacked by a giant claymation two-headed snail, and it's magic. And then they realize that they're stuck, and what is with this? I think maybe this guy is meant to be talking telepathically. His mouth never moves, but he has dialogue.
How long do you think it will be before the war spreads to Restes, then Clatonius, and Gondor?
They explore around, and there's other creatures about, and some lovely matte paintings, and thankfully they run into a woman who has some healing abilities. Then they just sort of check out this planet, running into an assortment of backyard-made monsters. And it's a sort of a series of adventures as they try to survive this planet that is apparently, according to some sources, mysterious. And this one was the directorial debut of Brett Piper, who would actually go on to a rather long career in low-budget film, both in the director's chair and in the special effects world. Some of his other work that you may be familiar with is They Bite, about the monster vaginas, and the infamous Nymphoid Barbarian in Dinosaur Hell. He's still active in the industry and does a good amount of work for Mark Polonia flicks, and even worked on Cocaine Shark. This was his first ever work and is meant to be very loosely based on Jules Verne's Mysterious Island, although that one was about Civil War prisoners of war in a hot air balloon landing on an island as opposed to a spaceship on a planet. It's very, very, very low budget and features a large amount of what I'm assuming are mistakes that are just left in the movie. At one point there's two characters talking and their voices are overdubbed, but they also left in the original audio. I think this is a mistake, unless it's meant to be some sort of actual effect, but it's really not clear.
Any other bring more destruction than every other war machine up to the time.
The Flash Arrow has only warships, only military types.
He destroyed either side. Either side.
On the side of peace.
Is leaving Piper giving direction to an actress.
Okay. You know, way back, then just stand up.
And this one didn't get any wide release, and for a while was virtually impossible to find and was some sort of lost treasure to track down on VHS. And this is pretty fun. I'm going with a 3 here. It's perhaps a bit too directionless and really drags and not much happens, but there's so much micro-budget inventiveness on display here that I couldn't help but enjoy it. Its significance is just a 1.5 though, since this is super obscure, and that 0.5 is just for kicking off Piper's career. Should you watch it? If you're a fan of stop motion monsters, absolutely.
I am the image of good health.
Our last movie with no set release date is super weird, but at least we know that it came out sometime in September of '82, and it's Human Highway. We're set in the future and in a dystopian-looking city, and there's a nuclear plant here, and the workers all glow. And are they not men? I don't know, but they are Devo. But they're not the only musicians, since Neil freaking Young is here as Lionel, and his boss is Dr. Jacoby. And holy crap, Frank Booth is here too, and so is the lead Cylon, Betty Briggs, and Oscar-nominated Sally Kirkland. Everyone is centered around this little gas station and diner that's next to the nuclear plant, and things are pretty weird. Like, full head mask weird. When Otto takes over the businesses after the passing of his dad, he makes some changes that makes the crew angry. But the main one seems to be banning music. He's also planning to burn the business down and collect the insurance on it. And people just keep showing up for a series of odd encounters with Hopper playing multiple parts, and yeah, this is a weird one. And what's weirder is that it's both written and directed by both Dean Stockwell and a guy named Bernard Shaky, which is a pseudonym for Neil Young. Filming took place over a span of 4 years, and Young financed it himself with $3 million of his own dollars. A good deal of the script was improvised on set by the individual actors, and most of the story grew out of the events that were developed as filming went on. Filming was said to be chaotic, as Hopper was at the height of his drug abuse and at one point was juggling knives, which led to Sally Kirkland getting slashed and severing a tendon. It had a premiere in Los Angeles and then just continued to screen at a handful of small theaters, but never had a wider release, and then didn't get a VHS issue for 13 years. And finally became available to the public in 1995, although in a shortened form. Even though the reviews on it weren't great, it must have had a fan in David Lynch, since at least 4 of the performers would go on to appear in Lynch's projects. It also became notable in the music industry for containing the only collaboration between Neil Young and Devo, as they do a version of Hey Hey, My together. And this is pretty fun, so it gets a 3, but it's not great. The story is a little too disjointed to amount to anything, but it's a good watch. Its significance is a 2, since it's still very obscure, but there's so many people of note involved that it's hard to give it a lower score. Should you watch it? I think so, particularly if you're a Lynch fan and want to see something that influenced him.
There ain't nobody getting out in this one, so get that one there!
Here's one that had a premiere screening on October 1st in Atlanta, and then some other screenings in a very limited run before getting a video release, and it's Sorceress. And it has this evil wizard named Trigon, and he has to sacrifice his firstborn to the god Caligara. but he has a problem when he discovers that his wife has given birth to twins. She refuses to say which was born first, which causes a problem for him, but the children are rescued at the last minute by Krona, who promises to raise them as great warriors. 20 years pass and Trigon is resurrected and still intent on that sacrifice. The babies are now grown women and oh my god, what the living hell is that thing? Well, this is Pando, and he's I think meant to be comic relief, but I find no relief in looking at this guy whatsoever. Trigon's men kill the girl's adopted family and team up with Baldar, a barbarian, and yep, they take Pando with them in an effort to get revenge. And I'm just gonna nip this in the bud right now since there's bound to be a comment about how sword and sorcery flicks aren't sci-fi, and this is your official notice that I know that, and that the Sci-Fi project will also include sci-fi, fantasy, superhero, and kaiju flicks in them. They encounter the roguish Erlich, who is shocked to discover that the twins are female since they hide their identity. And let me tell you, who would ever know, right? Oh, there's also this weird monkey thing here because your nightmares needed that in there as well. And even though this one says in the credits that it's directed by Brian Stewart, it's actually a pseudonym for Jack Hill, director of Spider Baby and Foxy Brown and the 1980 flick Ghost Ship. He had been working with Roger Corman and was approached about doing a response to Conan the Barbarian, and Hill wanted to do a variation on the Corsican Brothers. But I guess he also wanted to make a movie about a guy stripped naked and made to hold onto a greased pole, or else he would slide down onto a spike that went up straight into his butt. Hill had a horrible experience when it turned out that the budget he was promised never showed up, and he had to reduce the level of special effects. Also, he wrote the role of Pando for his friend, Sid Haig, but Corman didn't want to pay him, and they cast someone else instead. Finally, he claims to have written the entire script but didn't receive credit, and instead, that went to Jim Wynorski, and that much of the dubbed dialogue wasn't his, and he had no say in any of this. Because of all of this, he asked to have his name taken off the film, and Brian Stewart was credited instead. And that would end up being Hill's final work in the industry. The shrunken budget didn't only extend to the special effects though, since they also cheaped out on the music. It's credited to James Horner, and it is indeed his music, but all of it is simply music that he had done for Battle Beyond the Stars, reused here. It ended up doing okay though, and depending upon which report you look at, either made around $1.5 million or $3 to $4 million on a $500,000 budget. And I enjoy this, even with the cheese and sleaze, so I give it a 3. It's not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it has a certain charm to it. Its significance is just a 2, since I think that it's slightly more recognized, but not really, and didn't really leave an impact on the genre. Should you watch it? If you dig sword and sandals, sure.
Hold there. Stay away from her. She's under my protection.
The impact of Conan continued since on October 7th. In Italy, there was another release, although it wouldn't get a US one until 1983, and it's Ator, the Fighting Eagle. Like most of these movies, it starts with a child being born and a prophecy, again noted by a birthmark, just like in Beastmaster. It said that the baby would destroy the spider cult, so its leader, Dakar, played by an actor named Dakar, who you may remember as Lucas from Zombie, demands that the baby be found and destroyed. The baby is saved by a guy named Griba, who has been exiled, and I'm assuming it was for that haircut. I'm guessing that the spider priest was like, "Get your bangs on out of my kingdom, thank you," and take them to the realm of Courtney Cox and Scream 3 land. He covers the birthmark and gives it to a random couple of villagers to raise as their own, and he grows up to be Miles and Miles O'Keefe. And He's in love.
Why can't we marry?
Ator, we are brother and sister.
Yep. Seems like a good enough reason.
I'll talk with our father.
What's to talk about, Ator? You are brother and sister. But luckily, when he does, it's revealed that Ator is adopted, so they're not really brother and sister. They were only raised that way, so it's no longer creepy at all, right? During their wedding, though, Dakar's men attack, killing almost everyone, and he kidnaps Sunya. Ator reunites with Griba and then set out to find his sister Love with the help of his pet bear and the warrior woman Rune. And yeah, this is another Conan clone, and no surprise, it's from Italy. And this one is by Joe D'Amato, who I've covered quite a bit on the horror version of the project, with things like Absurd and Porno Holocaust, but this is actually a touch more elaborate production for him. The original script was written by Michel Suave under the working title of Fantasy, but D'Amato brought in another writer to revamp it and did some revisions himself. And in the credits, no one but Sherry Russell, a pseudonym, is acknowledged. The director claims to have not had a great time working with O'Keefe on set and stated that he didn't put much effort into his dialogue or fight scenes, even when fighting off his own shadow. But I guess thought his name sold enough tickets since he brought him back for more, which I'll talk about in a second. The film did well enough and pulled in over 1 million in America, even though the reviews tended to be flat overall. However, it made money, so when it was announced that Conan was getting a sequel, they rushed one into production here as well. O'Keefe would return with D'Amato to do 2 more Ator films, with the first coming very shortly after, and we'll talk about that one very soon. That one was called The Blade Master, but there would also be Iron Warrior, or Ator 3, and Quest for the Mighty Sword, the only one to not feature O'Keefe, and would instead focus on Ator's son. And to be honest, I think this one is just okay. I'm going with a 3 here. It has some moments, but Ator's a really dull hero. But I love that bear, that shadow fight, and of course the giant spider attack. Its significance is a 2.5 since I think it's become one of the more well-known Conan ripoffs, but it's still a cult film at best. Should you watch it? Sure, it's still a good time. This block ends on October 16th when it was given a limited test preview screening, although it wouldn't get a regular release until early 1984, and it's Android. This has Charlie in it, not Hunting Kreitz for once, and he's an android named Max 404, so I guess he's not found. But he was created by a Nosferatu. Max has a growing interest in human sexuality, but is stuck up on a space station, and down on Earth, they've canceled his program. Shortly after, Max gets a distress call from passing ships with a female pilot, but things are not what they seem because it's a prison transport and they're inmates that have escaped. They allow them to dock, where Max tries to make them comfortable, and he also appears to be able to move things with his mind. The dock is angry that Max allowed guests, and the prisoners have some internal issues of their own, but Daniel changes his mind about kicking them out once he sees a woman is with them. He starts to woo her, although Max sabotages their little date, and the dock is trying to use her to help create his new model, the Cassandra one. When Max destroys the ship of some police officers coming there, it creates some questions about who everyone trusts and what their next step is, as everybody on the ship tries to use the others to achieve their individual goals. And this one is another that was from Roger Corman's production studio, and it was the directorial debut of Aaron Lipstadt, who had previously been behind the scenes doing special effects for films like Escape from New York. After this, he'd do one more feature and then move into the TV world, where he has worked very steadily up until the present day. It was made for under $1 million with a quick 20-day shoot, but when it was done, Corman got cold feet. They did some test screenings that didn't go that well. Corman was disappointed that the film lacked his trademark violence and action, so the filmmakers raised up an extra $800K to get the full ownership. When it did finally get a run, it got mixed reviews, with some lauding the performances, but others complained about the general slow nature of it all. It didn't make much of an impact overall, though, and was soon relegated to a late rotation on cable networks. And this is a 2.5 from me. I want to like it more, but I feel like it's bringing up some interesting stuff and then never really explores them. Its significance is a 2, since it has some name cred and did get some play, but not all that much. Should you watch it? I'd say yes, particularly if you want a low-key sci-fi thriller.
Your lips. They're, quite full, aren't they?
So there you have it, getting closer to the ending of 1982 with sci-fi films. And the best one of this block, I think, I'm going to go with class of 1984. There's a couple in here I think that were pretty solid. There's nothing in this particular block that was a standout winner, but a bunch of ones that I enjoyed for the most part. Let me know which of these is your favorite down below, which of these you've never heard of, which of one of these you now wanted to see. Tell me in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit the like button, hit subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to get notified when new project episodes are going up. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can help support this project and this channel. And yes, we're going to keep on going on. There's one more episode left of 1982 for Sci-Fi. We'll continue that very soon, right here on the 80s Project.